Welcome to the home of forbidden love stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. He spent 6 months learning how to kill him. He only needed one night to fall in love with him. The best assassins don't hide in the shadows. They become something no one would ever bother looking at twice. Min-suk had perfected the art of being nothing. Soft eyes, rounded shoulders, the particular brand of silence that made drunk men feel powerful. Eclipse Tavern was a masterclass in invisibility. 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, rain punishing the windows, the air thick with cigarette smoke, and the sour breath of men who'd stopped pretending to be decent hours ago. Hey, little Omega. The man in the corner snapped his fingers like Min-suk was a dog he hadn't bothered to name. This glass is dirty. You people really can't do anything right. Min-suk smiled, took the glass, counted the man's pulse, visible, arrogant, throbbing at his throat. 3 seconds, he thought pleasantly. Maybe 2. He brought a clean glass instead. 187 days behind this bar. The Viper clan had chosen well. Eclipse Tavern sat precisely 3 blocks from the Crimson Syndicate's secondary operations hub, frequented by its soldiers, its lieutenants, and on quiet nights, its alpha boss himself. Min-suk's mission was elegant in its simplicity. Embed, observe, wait for the right moment, and eliminate Kwon Tae-woo cleanly enough that no trail pointed back to Viper hands. Simple. Min-suk had done worse for less. He'd never failed a contract. Not once in 11 years. The Phantom Blade didn't miss, didn't hesitate, didn't feel. He was architecture. Built for a single function, operating exactly as designed. He was mopping the floor near the back when the door opened. No announcement. No soldiers flanking the entrance. Kwon Tae-woo walked in from the rain like a man who'd forgotten he was supposed to have an entourage, shaking water from his jacket with the quiet irritation of someone perpetually inconvenienced by weather. He was taller than the surveillance photos suggested. The scar along his jaw caught the bar light. He sat at the far end of the counter. Said nothing. Placed 2 fingers on the wood. Min-suk put down the mop. Poured the whiskey without being asked. Single malt, 3 fingers, no ice. He'd learned Tae-woo's order on day 6 and filed it under operational intelligence. Their hands didn't touch. Tae-woo stared at the glass like it had personally disappointed him. Around him the bar lurched and laughed and reeked of itself, and he sat in the middle of it completely untouched by any of it. Not above it, just profoundly, quietly elsewhere. Catalog the weaknesses, Min-suk reminded himself, watching from the corner of his eye. He cataloged. He found something worse than weakness. He found a man who carried the full weight of his own empire with no one to set it down in front of. A man who ruled everything and rested nowhere. Tae-woo left without speaking. Exact cash on the counter, folded beneath the glass. Min-suk opened his encrypted laptop in the back room. Subject displayed no significant vulnerabilities, he typed. He stared at the words for longer than he should have. Hit send. The new message was already waiting. Viper Clan Handler. Priority flag. Deadline moved up. Terminate within 30 days. Confirmation required. Min-suk read it twice. Closed the laptop. Picked up his mop. Went back to work. Surveillance is just intimacy with deniability. Min-suk had always understood this intellectually. What he hadn't anticipated was how the intimacy would accumulate, quietly, the way water finds cracks in stone. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just night after night of watching a man be privately, inconveniently human. Night 34. Tae-woo left a generous tip, enough to draw attention. Min-suk clocked it immediately as image management, the kind of calculated generosity powerful men performed for witnesses. Then he watched Tae-woo slide the bills beneath a napkin before standing, ensuring no one saw. Ensuring Min-suk wouldn't be embarrassed by the amount in front of the other patrons. Reassess, Min-suk wrote in his log that night. He didn't elaborate. He wasn't sure how. Night 67. A girl stumbled through the door. Young Omega, her eyes glassed over with something pharmaceutical and her body moving like it belonged to someone else. 3 men followed 30 seconds later, wearing the particular casualness of hunters who weren't worried about being caught. Tae-woo didn't stand, didn't speak. He simply turned and looked at the men, and whatever lived behind his eyes in that moment was enough. They left. He made a single quiet phone call, his voice too low to carry. For minutes later, a black car took the girl somewhere safer. He never mentioned it. He returned to his drink like nothing had interrupted the evening. Min-suk stared at the counter he'd been wiping for 6 straight minutes. Night 112. Tae-woo came in bleeding. A knife wound beneath his ribs, low and mean, the kind that announced itself only in the careful way he lowered himself onto the stool. He didn't wince, didn't acknowledge it, ordered his drink and stared at the middle distance with the focused blankness of a man overriding his own body through sheer force of will. Min-suk placed a clean bar rag on the counter between them. Said nothing. Tae-woo went still. Then slowly he looked up. Really looked, the way he'd never quite bothered to before, like Min-suk had just resolved from background noise into something requiring actual attention. The eye contact lasted 4 seconds. He said nothing either. He took the rag. Night 156. Back booth. Low voice, the words arriving in fragments through the bar noise. I know he's not coming back. You don't have to keep saying it. A long pause. I'm fine. The way he said it, flat, practiced, the cadence of a sentence repeated so many times it had worn smooth, told Min-suk everything. He kept wiping the counter. What else was there to do with someone else's grief? Night 187. The kill order burning in his encrypted inbox. 30 days. Min-suk looked across the bar at Tae-woo in his corner, nursing his whiskey, carrying his empire alone in the dark. Something in his chest, scar tissue he'd always assumed, moved. After closing, alone in the gutted quiet of the bar, Min-suk heard himself whisper it like a confession. 187 days. You were supposed to be a target. The night everything broke open, it started with thunder and ended with blood.
If you're just joining us, subscribe to the channel for more interesting boys' love story. Here's what you need to know.
Min-suk noticed the wrongness before he could name it. A regular, the heavy-set man who always nursed his beer until midnight, left at 9:40 without finishing his glass. The specific black van parked across the street had not been there an hour ago. 2 men at the corner table ordered drinks and didn't touch them. His body made its assessments quietly, automatically, the way breathing happens. He kept wiping the counter. He waited. Tae-woo arrived at his usual time, took his usual seat, placed 2 fingers on the wood. Min-suk poured without being asked. Tae-woo looked worse than usual tonight. The exhaustion deeper, something fraying at the clean edges of his control. He stared at his glass and said nothing. Leave, Min-suk thought, with an urgency that had nothing to do with his mission. Tonight you should leave. The windows exploded inward. 10 men. Fast, coordinated, Viper Clan precision. Min-suk recognized the snake brand earrings on 4 of them because he had stood in a training room and watched them earn the right to wear them. His employers. His people. Tae-woo moved like a controlled catastrophe. Alpha pheromones detonating through the room in savage waves, his body already in motion before the glass finished falling. He was vicious and efficient and beautiful in the terrible way that apex things are beautiful. For men down before the others adjusted. But there were 10. 2 had him pinned against the far wall, weapons leveled, and Tae-woo was bleeding from his temple, chest heaving, eyes burning with a fury that had nowhere left to go. Min-suk stood behind the bar. This is it. The moment. Let it happen. Walk out. Collect the fee and disappear into the next life he'd already half prepared. Tae-woo didn't beg. Didn't bargain. Cornered and bleeding, he just looked at the men holding guns on him with an expression of such profound, exhausted refusal. Like dying was yet another inconvenience he resented being subjected to. Something in Min-suk's chest didn't snap so much as simply give way. He came over the bar like water finding its level. No announcement, no drama, just sudden terrible momentum. A bottle broken against the counter edge became a blade. A bar stool swung low, caught 2 knees simultaneously. He moved through the space between men like he'd mapped it years ago, which in some operational sense he had, and the soldiers hesitated because the human brain genuinely struggles to reconcile grace with that degree of violence happening at the same time. 90 seconds. 6 down. 2 more. Then silence, except for rain and the ragged orchestration of survival breathing. Min-suk stood in the wreckage. Blood on his forearms, none of it his. Chest heaving. He was still holding the broken bottle neck. Tae-woo stared at him from across the demolished room. Who the hell are you? Min-suk looked down at the bottle. Set it carefully on the nearest overturned table. Picked up his mop from where it had fallen against the bar. Jang Min-suk, he said. I work here. He turned toward the back. Tae-woo's hand closed around his wrist. Not violent, not rough. Just firm. The kind of grip that didn't ask permission because it already understood the answer didn't matter. Try again. He wanted a name. I gave him the one that would ruin everything. The bodies disappeared in 11 minutes. Min-suk counted. Taewoo's people moved with the specific wordless efficiency of men who had done this before and expected to do it again, and when the last one was gone the bar looked almost normal. Overturned furniture, broken glass, the smell of blood underneath the soju. Almost. Taewoo locked the front door himself. Then he sat down across from Min-suk in the back booth and did the most dangerous thing he could have done. He waited. No threats. No performance of authority. Just that particular alpha stillness. The kind that didn't need to fill silence because it had already decided silence was a tool it owned. His pheromones settled through the room like weather, low and steady and commanding, and Min-suk felt his own carefully constructed suppressions register the pressure and hold. Barely. Former military, he said. Combat trained. He'd rather not discuss the details. Taewoo's eyes moved over him the way a man surveys a locked door, not wondering if, only how long. It was profoundly uncomfortable to be read that way by someone whose habits and heartbeats Min-suk had catalogued for 6 months, only to realize the cataloging had apparently gone both directions without his knowledge. "You're not going to tell me anything real," Taewoo said. "Not an accusation. Just an observation, patient as geology. I told you my name. You told me what to call you." He picked up the cracked salt shaker someone had knocked over and set it upright, a small, unconscious gesture of order. "Different thing." Min-suk said nothing. The pheromones pressed quietly against his composure, and he pressed back, years of training holding the line, though tonight the line required actual maintenance in a way it hadn't in a very long time. He kept his breathing even, his expression neutral. He was very good at this. He was working harder at it than he'd like to admit. "I've watched you get treated like garbage for 6 months, Taewoo said, unprompted, his voice carrying no particular emotion. "You never reacted." A pause. "That's not patience. That's a man who decided he wasn't there yet." Something moved across Min-suk's face before he could stop it. "Not much. Enough." Taewoo saw it. Of course he did. He slid a card across the table. Black, minimal, just a number in clean white print. "Whatever you're hiding from, you'd be safer inside my walls than outside them." Min-suk looked at the card. Looked at the man who had been a target for so long he'd stopped feeling like one. He picked up the card. Later, on his apartment floor, back against the bed, card balanced between 2 fingers, his handler's number lit up his phone. "Did the mission complete tonight?" Min-suk stared at the ceiling. At the long quiet dark of a life that had just lurched sideways off every plan he'd made. "No," he said. "It got complicated. He brought me into his empire to keep me safe. He had no idea I was the wolf he'd invited in." Crimson Syndicate headquarters occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in Gangnam that spent its daylight hours pretending to be a luxury import firm. The lobby smelled like money and restraint. The elevator required biometric clearance at 3 separate intervals. Min-suk catalogued every exit on his way up and found himself genuinely impressed despite himself. His cover was elegant in its simplicity, personal aid. Close enough to observe everything. Invisible enough to be underestimated. He was very familiar with both conditions. What he wasn't prepared for was Taewoo in his domain. The man from Eclipse Tavern, tired, solitary, quietly human, did not disappear here exactly, but he receded behind something sharper and considerably more dangerous. Taewoo commanded rooms the way gravity commanded objects, without apparent effort or negotiation. His inner circle, for lieutenants, each lethal in their own specific register, deferred to him not from fear alone, but from something closer to conviction, which Min-suk understood was far more difficult to manufacture and far more durable once earned. And yet, the small things persisted. He knew every name in the organization, down to the night rotation security staff. He stopped by the medical room on Tuesday to check on a soldier with 2 broken ribs from a botched collection job, staying 4 minutes longer than necessary. His desk held, face down in the bottom drawer, a single photograph Min-suk never touched but couldn't stop noticing. "Stop," he told himself, with diminishing authority. "You are cataloging weaknesses." He was cataloging a person. The distinction was becoming a problem. The Viper clan's second message arrived on day 4. Encrypted. Terse. Mission failure noted. 30-day window expired. Complete the contract or the contract becomes you. Bounty authorized. Min-suk read it twice in a bathroom stall, then returned to his desk and formatted Taewoo's morning briefing documents with steady hands and a very full understanding that he was now being hunted by the same organization that had built him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He simply didn't have time for it. The late night came on day 6. both of them working past midnight, the office reduced to lamplight and the quiet industry of two people who didn't require noise to fill space. Min-suk was cross-referencing supply manifests when he noticed the silence had changed quality. Tae-woo had fallen asleep at his desk. Min-suk stood, moved to him slowly, the way you approach something you're not sure you have permission to witness. Without the architecture of wakefulness, Tae-woo looked younger. The scar along his jaw silver in the lamplight, his expression finally, completely undefended. The most dangerous person in the room stood over him and understood with perfect clarity that nothing was stopping him from walking out. Except wanting to. He placed Tae-woo's jacket over his shoulders. Left without sound. The Han River was black and indifferent at 1 a.m. Min-suk held the Viper Clan burner over the railing for a moment. This small object that connected him to everything he'd been built to be. Then let it go. His hands didn't shake. His heart did. I'd suppressed it for 3 years with medication and discipline and sheer refusal. Of course it chose now. It arrived without warning on a Thursday, a low, destabilizing heat that started behind his sternum and spread outward with the particular cruelty of biological processes that don't negotiate. Min-suk recognized it immediately, cataloged it with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything, and locked his safe house door with the quiet resignation of a man who understood that some battles are fought entirely alone. He had supplies. He had protocol. He had managed this before in worse conditions. Field assignments, compromised safe houses, once on a cargo ship in the Yellow Sea with nothing but cold water and willpower. He didn't need assistance. He had never needed assistance. The knock came 2 hours in. Not demanding. Just present. Then Tae-woo's voice, low and even through the door. Water. Food. I'm leaving them here. A pause that held no pressure in it. You don't have to do this alone if you don't want to. Min-suk said nothing. Heard him sit down on the other side of the door. He didn't leave. They talked through the wood between them, which was somehow more intimate than any room they'd shared. Tae-woo talked first, about his brother dead 3 years, absence that had never stopped having weight. About what it felt like to build something enormous with no one to show it to. You win enough, he said quietly, and you start to wonder what the winning was actually for. Min-suk listened to the grain of honesty in his voice and felt the heat pressing against his careful architecture and spoke around the edges of his own truth because it was all he knew how to offer. About being remade into something functional before he was finished being formed. About the specific amnesia of purpose. How it crowds out wanting until you can't remember what wanting felt like. Do you remember? Tae-woo asked. What you wanted? Before. The question sat in the space between them for a long time. No, Min-suk said. Then quieter. Maybe I'm starting to. He opened the door. What followed was not written in the language of urgency, but in something slower and more irreversible. Two people navigating the profound terror of being genuinely witnessed. The heat was present, yes, a warm and relentless undercurrent. But what undid Min-suk entirely was the way Tae-woo looked at him, like he was something worth understanding rather than something worth using. That was what he had no defense against. In the gray dissolution of early morning, Tae-woo slept. Min-suk lay beside him in the quiet and traced the scars on his forearm. This map of survived damage, each one a story he didn't yet know, and felt something in him finalize like a lock turning. He was done with the Viper clan. Whatever came for them next, whatever the cost of this particular defection, and he understood the cost would be significant and possibly unsurvivable. He would meet it standing beside this man. Not behind him with a blade. Never that. Not anymore. I built my empire on knowing everything about everyone. The one person I never investigated was the only one who mattered. The file arrived at 6 a.m. via encrypted Viper clan relay. A leak so deliberate it was practically a gift, which meant it was a weapon. Tae-woo understood this. He opened it anyway. Subject, Jang Min-suk. Alias, Phantom Blade. Operational classification. Apex Tier Contract Eliminator. Assignment, Eclipse Tavern. Duration, 187 days. Primary target, Kwon Tae-woo. He read it the way he read everything that mattered. Without expression, without movement, the stillness that his lieutenants had learned to read not as calm, but as the specific quiet before structural collapse. The operation reports were thorough. Clinical. Min-suk's handwriting, which Tae-woo now recognized from syndicate documents, rendered in a different register here. Precise, detached, the prose of a man who had learned to make himself absent from his own observations. His routines. His security patterns. his known associates, the whiskey preference, the corner seat. All of it documented with the dispassionate accuracy of a professional who understood that intimacy with a target was just methodology. Night 112. Tae-woo found the entry without looking for it. Subject displayed unexpected consideration. Reassessing timeline. The bar rag. He sat with that for a moment. The memory of looking up and finding Min-suk's eyes for the first time. The clean cloth appearing without comment or expectation. Filed, apparently, under unexpected consideration. Reassessing. Night 156. Subject exhibiting signs of prolonged emotional isolation. Note, possible leverage point. Note, it ended there. No follow-up. No analysis. Just the M-dash, hanging open like a sentence that had decided mid-thought it didn't want to be a weapon after all. Tae-woo stared at that interruption for a long time. Then he turned the page. The secondary section was a career summary. Phantom Blade's most notable contracts, included for verification of asset credibility. Standard file architecture. He read it with the same controlled stillness until he reached the entry dated 3 years ago, and the stillness became something different. Something that required more effort to maintain. Target, Crimson Ghost. Former Crimson Syndicate Lieutenant. Location, Incheon Warehouse District. Status, eliminated. Confirmed kill attributed to Phantom Blade. Tae-woo knew that name. Crimson Ghost. His brother's street name, earned in the years before he vanished. Before the identification, the closed casket, the phone calls Tae-woo still received sometimes from people who hadn't heard, which was how he knew the grief had no real floor to it, just depth after depth after depth. Min-suk had killed his brother. The man sleeping down the hall, whose scars he'd learned the geography of, whose careful fractured honesty had dismantled something in him he'd spent years constructing, had killed the only family he'd had left. He closed the file, folded it once along the existing crease, set it on the desk with precise, considered care. Then he stood up and walked toward Min-suk's room with the terrifying composure of a man who had just watched everything he'd rebuilt burn to the foundation, and had not yet decided what to do with the ash. The truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you exactly what the cage is made of. Tae-woo came through the door with the file in his hand and the specific quality of stillness that Min-suk now understood wasn't calm at all. He set it on the bed between them like evidence at a sentencing. Min-suk looked at it, looked at him. Didn't reach for denial because he'd never had the luxury of believing this moment wouldn't come. Had always known, somewhere beneath the warmth of the last few weeks, that the bill would arrive eventually and the amount would be everything. 187 days, Tae-woo said. Quiet. Precise. You were there to kill me. Yes. The word landed without softening. Min-suk owed him that much, the clean truth undecorated. He absorbed Tae-woo's expression shifting through something enormous and barely contained and held his ground, because flinching now would be its own kind of dishonesty. The ambush. You could have let it happen. Yes. But you didn't. Not a question. An attempt to locate solid ground in collapsing terrain. No. Tae-woo's jaw tightened. The pheromones in the room had moved from controlled to something rawer. Grief and fury braided together so tightly they'd become a third thing. Not quite either. Give me a reason, he said. Not to, he stopped. Looked away. Min-suk watched him fight himself and felt the cost of it like something physical. Then Tae-woo turned to the second section of the file. Min-suk saw the exact moment he found the entry. Watched the stillness become catastrophic. Crimson Ghost, Tae-woo said. The name came out destroyed. Tae-woo, you killed my brother. He crossed the room and his hand closed around Min-suk's collar. Not striking, just holding, the alpha grief so enormous it had nowhere else to go. Don't say anything. Don't. He didn't die. The room went absolute. Tae-woo's grip didn't loosen. His eyes did something complicated and devastating. What did you just say? I was sent to kill him. I went to the coordinates, I completed what looked like the mission, and I left. Min-suk kept his voice level because one of them needed to be. 3 weeks later, I found out the identified body wasn't him. Someone staged it. Someone needed both of you to believe he was dead. What followed was an hour that aged them both. Min-suk walked him through everything. The ghost investigation he'd run for 3 years in the margins of other work, driven by a mission that had never stopped feeling wrong. The stage scene's forensic inconsistencies. The payment trail that dissolved into a government black account. The organization he'd eventually found at the end of it, ARIA. Shadow classification. Mandate: identify and neutralize omegas carrying apex predator genetic markers before they became ungovernable assets. Tae-woo sat down slowly on the edge of the desk, the rage draining into something heavier. The Viper clan, he said. Someone built it from inside syndicate knowledge. A long pause. My brother built the Viper clan. To protect you, Min-suk said. And to build something large enough to draw Arya into the open. He needed both organizations destabilized simultaneously. Enough chaos to force them to deploy field operatives, expose their infrastructure. He paused. He needed a war. He just needed the right people to fight it. The phone on Tae-woo's desk buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it for one long breath. Answered. The voice that came through was older than he remembered, rougher, carrying 3 years of whatever it had survived, but unmistakable. Absolutely, irrevocably unmistakable. Hello, Tae-woo, it said. I think it's time we talked. We were a mafia boss, an assassin, and a ghost. Against a government agency with unlimited resources. Somehow those felt like reasonable odds. Kwon Tae-jin walked into the safe house at midnight looking like what 3 years undercover in your own constructed criminal empire does to a person. Which is to say, like something that had been through a refining fire and come out harder and less certain of its own reflection. He was leaner than the surveillance photos Min-suk had studied. The resemblance to Tae-woo present but refracted. The same bone structure arrived at by a different road. He looked at Min-suk first. Not with suspicion. With something that took a moment to identify because Min-suk hadn't expected it. Gratitude. I was hoping it would be you, Tae-jin said. When they assigned the contract. I'd heard enough about Phantom Blade to believe you'd see through the staging. A pause. I wasn't wrong. You gambled your cover on a contractor reading a crime scene correctly, Min-suk said. I gambled it on the best, Tae-jin said simply, and turned to his brother. What passed between Tae-woo and Tae-jin in the next few minutes wasn't something Min-suk could fully translate. 3 years of grief and fury and relief compressing into the particular terseness of men who had learned early that feeling things openly was a liability. They didn't embrace. They stood close enough that the space between them was a conversation, and spoke in low voices, and Min-suk found something to study on the opposite wall until the room's temperature recalibrated. Then they got to work. Arya was moving. Tae-jin's intelligence, bought with 3 years of his life, confirmed field operatives deploying within the week, targeting Apex Omega individuals flagged in their registry. Min-suk's name sat at the top of the list. Tae-jin's cover, burned by the Viper clan leak, had placed him second. The syndicate war they'd been orchestrating was drawing Arya exactly as intended, but the window was closing. The plan assembled itself from their combined resources with the clean logic of 3 people who each held a piece the others needed. Tae-jin had the internal intelligence, Arya's operational structure, the evidence chain justifying their illegal program, the names. Min-suk had the network, 11 contractors across 4 cities who owed him enough to move on short notice, no questions. Tae-woo had the army, the infrastructure, and the particular talent for making institutional problems disappear that came from running Seoul's most efficient criminal organization for a decade. It was Min-suk thought an objectively reasonable coalition. He found the rooftop by instinct, the highest accessible point, the habit of a man who'd spent years needing to see what was coming. Seoul sprawled below in its indifferent luminescence, 10 million lives generating their own light, unbothered by the machinery of violence operating in its upper floors. He heard Tae-woo behind him before he spoke. You could have let them kill me that night, Tae-woo said, coming to stand beside him. Not touching, just present shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the city. At the bar, the mission would have been clean. I know. Why didn't you? The question settled into the cold air between them. Below, Seoul hummed its vast and different hum, glittering with the beauty of things that don't know they're being watched. Night 34, Min-suk said finally. You tipped me and hid the money so no one would make me feel small about needing it. Tae-woo said nothing. I think I was already gone by then. I just didn't know it yet. Tae-woo reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically. Not with declaration. Just took it the way you take something you've decided belongs with you, and held it, and they stood there while the city breathed below them. Later, in the war room, the operation spread across the screens in clean, terrible geometry. Moving pieces, exposure windows, the architecture of a reckoning 3 years in the making. Tae-jin stood at the center of it, pointing precise. The syndicate lieutenants absorbed their assignments with the focused quiet of professionals who understood the stakes. Minsuk stood beside Taewoo and looked at the man who was supposed to be a target, who had turned out instead to be the only coordinates he'd ever navigated toward that felt like arriving somewhere rather than escaping. Let them come, he thought, as the city glittered on below them, vast and indifferent and entirely unaware of what was about to move through it. We'll be ready.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell us your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more stories.